Hey there, everyone. That sexy nerd is back again, and we got more House of the Dragon. I told you I'd be doing new Rockstars, but yeah, I know it took me so long. Unfortunately, was too busy today, but I'm here now. So really not much to talk about. Let's just get into the video. And remember, please smash that like button if you want to see more sexy and nerdy content, and subscribe if you think I deserve it. And remember, also subscribe to my Patreon. It's going strong, and I got people to watch the first episode of House of the Dragon season 2. So let's do it, y'all.
Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Eric Boss, and this is a breakdown of House of the Dragon season 2, episode 1. A son for a son. Everything you missed in this episode, even stuff that you wish you could have missed because this was so heartbreaking. Over the next 8 weeks, we are going to be analyzing every Hot D episode, scene by scene, diving deep into the visuals, the music, the deeper layers of meaning, and the lore from George R. R. Martin's Fire and Blood. But for those who did not read the book, all theories, speculation, and spoilers that would only really be known to book readers will be confined to our spoiler dungeon at the end of the video. But most of this video is just going to be analyzing some cool details that were put into the filmmaking of the show and covering everything that's happened on House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones up until this point. All right, let's get started. This season does away with the flowing blood and stone dials of the opening credits of last season and replaces the imagery with this woven tapestry. And in my opinion, it's a vast improvement. Tapestries like these are how royal families of the Middle Ages would document their histories, hanging them on display. There's a lot to analyze in this tapestry alone, so I'm gonna go deep into it. But if you want to get into the opening scene of the episode, you can skip to the next chapter at this time. Okay,
Hi, I'm Kat Graham, and I have something very important to share with you. A gruesome war is
red dye splashes into this pale weave. We can imagine blood staining pale human hair, perhaps the son for a son slaying that happens at the end of this episode. But as gold threads weave out around this red dye, we zoom out and realize that it is depicting blood pouring down from a castle in Valyria. This is the same structure that last season's opening titles ultimately depicted in its final wide shot, a smaller model of which Viserys had in his quarters in season 1. So really this tapestry is taking us from those credits into this new extended history. And at first, it seems to be showing the history of Valyria before the Doom of Valyria. The Doom of Valyria was the apocalyptic event in which the 14 flames, the chain of volcanoes on the Valyrian Peninsula, all erupted at once, shattering the landmass that had lasted 5,000 years, losing all kinds of advancements in art like how to forge Valyrian steel, and killing most of the dragons and dragon riders. But the Targaryens had escaped 12 years prior, resettling on Dragonstone, due to the prophetic visions of this calamity by Daenerys the Dreamer. I believe this first female figure might be the first blood sacrifice in Old Valyria committed by the blood mages to give the Valyrians command over the dragons. There is a figure behind her with a dagger or a broken sword, which might be one of the blood mages of Valyria. These were the sorcerers who practiced dark magic requiring blood sacrifices, and it was believed that they and the pyromancers could have triggered the Doom of Valyria. And in fact, that's something that Viserys even speculated in season 1. For all of this to start with the sacrifice of a woman speaks to the women who suffer the most in this series, and the possibility that Helaena might have been trying to shift that pain from women to men with her critical choice. Helaena, after all, seems to be the first female Targaryen dreamer since Daenerys, and this whole opening sequence seems to be depicting the prophecy that Helaena muttered back in season 1, episode 7.
No, it's not. That's the Field of Fire. That's the Field of Fire, since there's 3 dragons and all those people dying, and there's a red, there's a red field.
No. Green, spool of black, dragons of flesh, weaving dragons of thread.
Okay, the next part of the tapestry shows this silver-haired woman holding a sleeping or a dying figure in her arms. You know, this might actually be Daenerys the Dreamer, as the red and gold weaves curl out toward what is clearly now the Doom of Valyria. That's definitely a volcano exploding. The sky is on fire. The dragons are falling. It's hard to tell, but I think there are 7 volcano peaks on either side of the city here, which would make a total of 14, making these the 14 flames. In this image, it seems like Daenerys is holding her dying father, Aenar, and you can actually see the island they fled to, Dragonstone, in the background behind them. Okay, next, this is clearly Aegon the Conqueror's flight west to Westeros from Dragonstone. Aegon is out front riding Balerion the Black Dread, followed by his sister wife Rhaenys riding the silver-scaled Meraxes, and then his other sister wife Visenya riding the green-scaled Vhagar. Yes, the same Vhagar, currently ridden by Aemond. Beneath these 3 dragons, crossing into Blackwater Bay, are ships with sails bearing the crest of House Velaryon, fellow dragon riders who survived Valyria and aided Aegon's conquest with sea power. Next, a king being burned alive. This is King Mern IX of House Gardner, the last king of the Reach, perishing in a battle called the Field of Fire.
Yes.
So at this point, Aegon had already burned Harrenhal, he had conquered the Stormlands, and then he moved on to the Westerlands and the Reach. Mern IX marched from Highgarden and joined Loren Lannister from the Westerlands, but then Aegon and his sisters attacked with dragons and torched 5,000 men in what was later called the Field of Fire. Mern died, but Loren Lannister got away and bent the knee and was named Aegon's Warden of the West, establishing the Lannister family's dominance in the Westerlands for generations. So the tapestry here showing Mern at center, dead Gardner men on the right with their open hand sigil, and dead Lannisters on the left with their lion sigil. Vaegar's on the left, Valerion's on the right, chomping down on both flanks. Okay, next, this is Torrhen Stark, the king who knelt. You can see his white direwolf sigil on his cloak. This would be when Torrhen crossed the Trident and yielded to Aegon the Conqueror, not wanting to send his men to the same fate as those suffered at Harrenhal in the Field of Fire. To the right of Torrhen, kneeling, that is Edmund Tully, who bent the knee after Aegon and Balerion torched Harrenhal. But to the left, that is Shara Arryn. You can see the white crescent moon and the falcon sigil on her cloak for House Arryn. Sharon was Queen Regent of the Vale, and that looks like her son Ronald to her side. Shara submitted after Ronald took a fun but very scary to the mom flight on Vaegar. And there's a cool effect here that I love. The blood that was staining the weave beneath them stops and fades at their feet, showing how their decision to take the knee stopped the bloodshed. So next,
to get started in data analytics, you don't need previous experience or a degree. The Google Data Analytics Certificate.
So next we see the three-headed dragon sigil of the Targaryen family. Having heraldry at all is a Westerosi custom, so Aegon just kind of had to adopt this. It looms over the city of King's Landing with an early version of the Red Keep. The Red Keep started construction during Aegon's reign, but it would not be completed until the third member of this dynasty, his son Maegor the Cruel. And that's what we see here. After 4 rebellions faced by his successor, Aenys, Maegor ended up in a bloody conflict with Aenys' heir, Prince Aegon, and took up the throne himself, married 3 black brides, lost a ton of support due to his cruelty. He did have all the architects and engineers of the Red Keep executed to keep its secrets, and Maegor the Cruel was found mysteriously dead on the Iron Throne in 48 AC, and he looks stabbed through the throat here, either by murder or maybe by the throne itself, rejecting him. On either side of dead Maegor are the heads of Vermithor, that's Jaehaerys' dragon, and Silverwing, his sister wife Alysanne's dragon. And those golden and silver necks stretch down to Jaehaerys and Alysanne. Jaehaerys is holding Blackfire here. We see the sigil of the faith of the Seven at his side, because unlike his successors, Jaehaerys accepted the faith. He stayed in just one stable marriage, and due to his peace with the faith, he was known as the Great Conciliator. On the
series, it's conciliator, by the way. And second, I really want a show on Jaehaerys' rule, all of it, but you'd have to tell Maegor's story too, so it's expansive.
right is a pot of gold, because his reign was also a very prosperous time. That is the reign that comes to an end at the start of this series, because Jaehaerys was the king we met in the opening scene of the pilot episode when he was announcing his heir at the Great Council of 101. Now we're finding ourselves in the history we have seen on the show, the Great Council of 101 at Harrenhal. We see this same lineup in the first minute of the pilot episode. To Jaehaerys' left is the High Septon, to his right is Wyam Redwine, Lord Commander of the King's Guard. On the left side is Viserys, who is the heir chosen by the council, and his wife Emma, who is currently here pregnant with Rhaenyra, though in the book Rhaenyra was 4 years old at this point. And then on the right side is Corlys Velaryon and his wife Rhaenys, who, as a child to Jaehaerys' oldest son, Aemon, who's dead at this point, Rhaenys should have been the heir if not for male primogeniture, which led to her being called the queen who never was. But in the book, Rhaenys' claim had already ended before this moment of the council, so really the choice was between Viserys and Rhaenys and Corlys' very young son, Leonor. Next we see Alicent Hightower in her fabulous green dress from season 1, episode 5, when she showed up to Rhaenyra and Leonor's wedding wearing not Targaryen red and black, but Hightower green. Then an overhead shot of the greens versus the blacks as Rhaenyra stands opposite Alicent on the other side. On the top, we see the blacks, Daemon, Rhaenys, Corlys, Jacaerys, Lucerys, and Joffrey. And then on the bottom, the greens, Helena, Aegon, Aemond One Eye, Sir Criston Cole, and Otto Hightower. Then we see Aegon II sitting the Iron Throne wearing Aegon I's ruby crown, while Rhaenyra sits on the throne at Dragonstone wearing the crown of Viserys and Jaehaerys. We pull back from this tapestry to show a green hand beneath Aegon II releasing ravens, since Otto and Alicent this episode want to fight with diplomatic letters, while a black hand beneath Rhaenyra releases dragons, since she and Daemon aren't as afraid to use dragon power. And surrounding this are a whole bunch of famous house sigils from A Song of Ice and Fire. On the green side, you can see the sigils of House Stokeworth, that's the lamb on green, that's at the bottom there. And then moving up, the black stag on yellow, that's House Baratheon, because Boris was won over by Aemond at the end of last season. Then Hightower, obviously, then House Lannister, because Tyland Lannister sits in the small council. And then I think at the top that might be House Peak, that's a 3 castle sigil. They're from the Reach, they do support the greens. And then on the black side of it, on the right margin from the top right corner, that's House Stark, I think it's House Stark. And then beneath that, House Aaron, that's definitely the Crescent and the Falcon. And then Velaryon, the Seahorse, of course. And then that might be House Tully, who, along with the Starks, get won over by Rhaenyra's forces this episode. And then at the bottom, yellow and black stripes with the bees, House Beesbury. Dear me. This ends with the depiction of the battle over Storm's End from the season 1 finale. Aemond atop Vhagar, chomping down on Arrax as Lucerys falls to his death. But let's keep an eye on this pre-title shot in particular, because I feel like this, if not more of the opening sequence, will update every episode to reflect the latest atrocities. Okay, the episode opens with a raven flapping through the trees.
You can hear the Stark music too.
Ah, that is Ramin Djawadi's theme music for House Stark as we begin this episode in the north at Winterfell. It's wild how with just a quick pan we go from the green hills and a high country lake to Winterfell on a frozen landscape. As if after the wall, Winterfell is the last thing keeping the frost at bay. Yeah, season 2 is opening with total Game of Thrones era vibes, and I have no problem with it because we hear Cregan Stark.
Duty is sacrifice.
Is sacrifice.
It eclipses all things, even blood.
A stark thematic contrast to the decision-making of the hot-blooded Targaryens of the South, where blood begets blood, and the good of the realm and a sense of duty is put aside for things like vengeance. Now, of course, Rhaenyra was inspired by a sense of duty by Viserys, sharing with her Aegon's Song of Ice and Fire dream, but as of this episode, she just wants blood. Cregan is really giving this advice to Rhaenyra's son, Jace, who Rhaenyra sent here at the end of last season to ensure Starks remain loyal to her. We don't yet know if Rhaenyra shared Aegon's dream with Jace. It seems like not yet, but we begin this season hoping that Jace might lead with a sense of duty. Unfortunately, this raven we're seeing is bringing word of his brother's death. Cregan explains how Torrhen Stark, the king who knelt, established a tradition of giving 1 in 10 men from House Stark at the start of every winter to fortify the wall, along with the condemned men who normally run it. We see 3 kids running around.
You know, I've never heard of the reason why they stopped that tradition. You know, I don't think I ever heard of it in the book either. Like, why did that stop? But, you know, they just stopped caring.
Around with a direwolf pup. These kids might be Cregan's children. Brandon, Barthagan, Lyanna, or Jonel. The one with the stick, I'm thinking might be Jonel because he was called One Eye, and I wonder if he poked his eye out. As for the unlucky Stark guy who draws the black rock, Cregan's father, Rickon, had a second son we don't know much about, so this could be Cregan's younger brother. Now, Cregan in the book has a bastard half-sister, Sarah Snow, who, according to Mushroom, Jace fell in love with during this visit and secretly married in the Godswood. But Archmaester Gildane denies it, and we don't see it on the show, so I don't think it happened. Cregan and Jace visit the Wall, which does not happen in the book. They just got along drinking and hunting during their time in Winterfell. And the Wall's a pretty good ways distance from Winterfell. But Jace says,
"It pleases me to think that over a century ago our ancestors treated in this very place, the Conqueror and the King in the North.
You, at least, had the mercy not to threaten me with your dragon."
Aegon the Conqueror did not visit the Wall as far as we know. Torrhen bent the knee at the Trident. Cregan is carrying on his back Ice, the Valyrian steel sword of House Stark, which will later be carried by Ned Stark in the Game of Thrones era. And Jace reminds Cregan of House Stark's pledge to support Rhaenyra. We saw the hardy Rickon Stark begrudgingly supporting Viserys' naming of Rhaenyra as his heir during the montage at the end of the pilot episode. But Jace shrugs off Cregan needing his men to keep out snow and savages, but Cregan shuts him up with just a view.
War is coming. To the whole of the realm, my lord. We cannot wage it without the support of the North.
He can't even say the word north without losing his breath. Here is a dragon rider used to flying above clouds, seeing a vast misty expanse without a clear horizon line. Cregan says that his father brought King Jaehaerys and Queen Alysanne to see the Wall, and that Jaehaerys stood right here and watched as his dragons refused to cross the Wall. Fire and Blood claims that Alysanne tried to take Silverwing over the Wall 3 times, and that each time Silverwing turned back and hissed at every northern gust. She actually wrote her husband, quote, "She does not like this Wall." In Fire and Blood, Jaehaerys wasn't present for that particular visit. But in chapter 5 of A Feast for Crows, Sam speaks of another visit to Winterfell by both Alysanne and Jaehaerys where they did fly past the wall. Now again, Jaehaerys' dragon was Vermithor, and we did see Daemon with Vermithor, the Bronze Fury, in the Dragonmont on Dragonstone at the end of last season, and trailer footage shows its updated elderly look as it roars at Rhaenyra. So we will see Vermithor this season.
That is
Cregan
Vermithor.
asks,
Do you think my ancestors built
Knew
a
it.
700-foot wall of ice to keep out snow and savages?
What does it keep out?
Death.
Ramin Djawadi also brings back the icy White Walker theme from Game of Thrones. If Jace does learn Aegon's dream, this conversation with Cregan and his glimpse beyond the wall is going to give that song an even deeper weight. Now, we do not see Jace's dragon Vermax here in the north, but in Fire and Blood, Mushroom claims that Vermax laid a clutch of eggs in Winterfell that stayed in the crypts. Since it seems that Jace did not bring his dragon to the wall, we do have to wonder where it was kept during this side trip. So, who knows? Rhaenys returns to Dragonstone atop her dragon Melis. Yeah, Gevi is a High Valyrian command of good, one of the hundreds of words created by language expert David J. Peterson for this show. The dragon tamers say umbas, which means wait. When we last saw Rhaenys, she flew out from Dragonstone to block the Gullet, which is the stretch of water between Driftmark and Massey's Hook that connects Blackwater Bay to the Narrow Sea. It's the primary shipping lane from Essos and the Free Cities to get stuff to King's Landing. Daemon wants Rhaenys and their dragons to kill Vhagar and Aemond.
Make it a son for a son.
A Son for a Son is this episode's title and the chapter of Fire and Blood that this episode adapts. And perhaps what's worst about this Hammurabi mindset is Article of A,
Hammurabi,
as in any
wow.
son for any son. It's just so wanton and blind. And as Rhaenys' eyes dart at Daemon, we hear the dragon Melis emitting this whistle-like cry in the background. It's a unique sound for the she-dragon beckoning her rider not to be pushed around by this cousin who, when it was her son who died, or so she thought, Daemon did nothing, and as far as she knows, might have even been involved in that believed death. She also brings up Leonor's sister, Lyanna, who was Daemon's one-time wife.
It was a raven that brought me news of Laena's death. I existed for weeks in torment.
Shaming Daemon for not telling her himself, suggesting, don't you remember how stunned into silence and paralysis a loved one's death can leave you? Rhaenys says that she needed to see Lyanna's remains to believe it, and Rhaenyra will need to see Luke's remains as well. And a ruler recusing themselves to grieve and not letting that grief dictate their next move is really the wisest path. Daemon says,
If you'd have acted when you had the chance, Aegon's line would be extinguished, and Luke would be alive.
He's referring to the moment Rhaenys and Melis crashed Aegon II's coronation in the Dragon Pit in season 1, a moment that was not in the book, when Rhaenys killed hundreds of commoners, but chose restraint with the Greens on the dais. A decision that I'm sure is going to come back to haunt a lot of these characters. Daemon says,
Fly with me. It is a command.
Come fly with
You were the
me.
king.
Yeah, this season will likely continue to explore Daemon's selfish desire for the Iron Throne, a future source of contention between him and Rhaenyra. An interesting connection between the cousins Rhaenys and Daemon. Daemon's dragon Caraxes was previously written by Rhaenys' father, Aemon, son of Jaehaerys and Alysanne, who died before he could take the throne, while Rhaenys' dragon Melis was previously written by Daemon's mother, Alyssa. So whenever they look at each other, they see the dragon that their parent rode, and that's always going to be like a point of respect between these two cousins. Meanwhile, Rhaenyra looks out at the Castle of Storm's End, where her son Luke clashed with Aemond atop Vhagar. She is still wearing the same clothes that she was wearing in the final shot of season 1, meaning that she rushed out on her dragon and didn't even change into riding gear, and she has not changed since then. And we have been told that season 2 begins 10 days after the end of season 1.
Really?
Meanwhile, in Driftmark, Corlys
Jesus.
Velarion's ship, which is called the Sea Snake, also the nickname for himself, is being restored after it was damaged at the Stepstones. This was the defeat that led to his serious injury last season. The ship being restored is a metaphor for Corlys himself, a vessel bloodied and barnacled, being readied for another voyage despite probably being too weathered to actually be useful. Corlys meets with Alan of Hull, a new character this season played by Abubakar Salim. He is the one who pulled Corlys from the water, and we get a mention of his brother, who we'll learn is Adam of Hull, played by Clinton Liberty this season. We're going to meet him later on.
Adam
There's
of
this
Hull.
stiff vibe between the men here, and I'm okay
I know
speculating
why.
this here because even the book leaves it uncertain. In Fire and Blood, Alan and Adam are bastards born with silver hair and Valyrian features, and their mother, Marilda, claim that their father was Leonor Velaryon, but Mushroom claims that they're the bastard sons of Corlys, kept at a distance to avoid offending his wife Rhaenys.
Right.
And that's certainly how this scene is being played, right? Like, this is like Ned Stark with Jon Snow. Also, Leonor on the show seems younger than Alan and Adam are here. There's more to say about Adam and his brother and something that happens in this scene, but I'm gonna save that for the spoiler dungeon. Okay, in King's Landing, soldiers from House Hightower patrol the battlements commanded by Sir Auric Cargill of the King's Guard. His twin brother, Sir Eric, serves Rhaenyra. Last season, Sir Eric was the one who took Viserys' crown to her. Yeah, the names do sound alike, and like multiple characters having the name Aegon and the idea of Daemon versus Aemond, this was George R. Martin's intent. Like, these families are obsessed with keeping names and recycling them through the family, making power plays with how they decide to name their kids, and these confusing homophonic parallels make a fog of an interfamily conflict and a civil war all the more bewildering. We see how they're freaked out about a dragon attack armed up with a scorpion. This is the anti-dragon weapon that we saw used in Game of Thrones. But it turns out the dragon is Vhagar, Aemond's dragon, so they stand down. I love how, like us, these Hightowers struggle to tell the dragons apart from a distance, and it shows how poor the communication is because Aemond didn't even bother to tell Sir Auric that he would be taking a flight and not to get everyone so scared and worked up. In the royal nursery, Queen Helena sews what looks like a golden dragon as her brother husband, King Aegon II, marches in.
You actually have to check.
Where is Jaehaerys?
Aegon mistakes one silver-haired twin for another. This is his daughter, Jaehaera. This is setting up this whole idea of toggling between two similarly looking twins to set up the critical moment at the end of this episode with Blood and Cheese. Now, in Fire and Blood, there is a third child, a younger brother, Maelor. Maybe he's not born yet. It's possible that they wrote Maelor out of the story, even though there was a dial for Maelor in the season 1 opening credits imagery. If they wrote Maelor out of the show, that would be interesting, because in the book, the Blood and Cheese moment occurs between the two boys, Jaehaerys and Maelor. The daughter, Jaehaera, is left out of it, but I think there's a specific reason for this change besides watering down the violent moment that I'll talk about later. There is another bed, could be a crib by the door that looks like it might have these hanging puppets or marionettes. There's one girl, one boy, looks like toys for the twins, Jaehaerys and Jaehaera, maybe to show both of them hanging in the balance. But if it was a third bed or a crib, it could imply that they intended to have a third kid. Helena contests Aegon taking Jaehaerys away from his lessons.
He'll be king one day, he must begin his instruction.
What if he does not want to be king?
I feel like this informs her decision to later point to Jaehaerys. She takes the boy out of the line of succession. Helena says she's afraid.
Why, though?
The dragons. The rats.
Obviously foreshadowing these characters being so distracted by a dragon attack from above that they don't think about the threat from below, the Red Keep tunnels that people like Daemon know better than anyone. Another interesting change from the book is that the show implies that Helena might be a dreamer or a green seer, someone who has visions of the future, like Daenerys the dreamer. In season 1, she predicted Aemond losing an eye and Rhaenys crashing the coronation. So what does it say that the Greens have their own prophetic dreamer on their side? Could they use Helena to stay ahead of the Blacks in ways that weren't in the book? Or are they just going to ignore her or misinterpret her in a tragic way, the way modern Targaryens seem to misinterpret all dreams? Alicent grips the armrest as Sir Criston, to use Rhaenys' term, gorges. On her thumb, you can see some scarring from where she would be picking at them. This was her nervous tick from last season, and while it's somewhat healed over, she is still clearly picking at it given her son Aemond throwing a wrench into everything. While Sir Criston's armor pieces were cast onto the floor, his white cape of the King's Guard was delicately laid out on the table. I kind of like that when they start getting into it, he was like, wait, this can't get dirty. This may remind you of when Sir Criston hooked up with Rhaenyra in season 1 and he gently laid his white cape on the back of the chair because as a Knight of the King's Guard, he's supposed to be celibate. But whether he's with Rhaenyra or Alicent now, he breaks that vow constantly, and he is a hypocritical piece of shit. Alicent says,
There's a chilling summer is well and truly through.
The winter is coming that Craig and Stark warned about is being felt even down in King's Landing, which means that they will be even more dependent on trade with Essos and Sothros to survive this winter in Westeros. Alicent says that she and Criston cannot do this again, but sure enough, what are they doing in the final scene when Helena runs in? Yup, that's why Sir Criston doesn't protest this. Alicent has probably said this never again many times before. We get our first look at the rat catcher known as Cheese, played by Mark Stobbart. Remember, there were shots of rats throughout the Red Keep in many moments in season 1, and and they were all to set up this guy having a reason to be seen throughout the Red Keep without anyone thinking twice about it. Alicent and Sir Criston passed right by him in the shadows of the small council chamber, telling us that he has access to all of these intimate corners. We actually see the Ratcatcher Cheese in the background of Aegon's petition scene in the throne room later on in this episode, so Cheese is always lurking in the background. Aegon II's small council includes Master of Laws Jasper Wilde, aka Iron Rod, for his unyielding attitude about the law, and also probably for other reasons. Grand Maester Orwyle, Master of Coin Tyland Lannister, played by Jefferson Hall, who played Sir Hugh of the Vale in Game of Thrones, and also Chevalier in Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer, and Hand of the King Otto Hightower. Otto reminds us that the Stormlands are secure since Aemond made a marriage pact with Floris Baratheon, Lord Boros' daughter, while the young Prince Jaehaerys plays with Tyland's attendance ball. Tyland mentions his brother amassing forces in the Golden Tooth, referring to his twin brother Jason, who was also played by Jefferson Hall in season 1. But remember, this yellow ball was used to crush the skull of Tyland's predecessor, Lord Beesbury. Dear me. So I think it's kind of a cursed death ball for this cursed boy to be playing with. Aegon tells Tyland to give the prince pony rides, but Alicent says enough is enough, but is sure to chastise Tyland for interrupting. She's doing the kind of thing Cersei would do to members of the small council in order to placate the brat Joffrey in Game of Thrones whenever he would act up. The discussion shifts to breaking the blockade, and Orwyle suggests to bring in the young Lord Dalton Greyjoy as Master of Ships. So Dalton Greyjoy, aka the Red Kraken, is the current 16-year-old Lord of the Iron Islands, a bloodthirsty seafarer who plays a big role in the future of the Civil War, but he hasn't yet been cast for season 2, so I think we might just hear him getting mentioned in background events. Aegon has invited his brother Aemond to the meeting, and Aemond desires a towhole in the Riverlands at Harrenhal, and Aegon agrees. He wants to fly Sunfire and Vhagar throughout the Riverlands. Alicent just gives Sir Criston a look, and Criston tells the king that he can't put himself in the middle of battle, and Alicent says that they can't move Vhagar away from King's Landing because that would leave them undefended. But then the grandpa of this family turns against the daughter to shut up all the younger generations.
Errors were made in the hours following King Viserys' death. We mustn't compound them.
So Otto is saying, before you shame Aemond for killing Luke, remember that I told you that we'd have to kill Rhaenyra and Daemon, Rhaenys, all of Team Black to cement Aegon's coronation, but you didn't listen then. Alicent passes Lord Larys Strong, Master of Whispers, who says he personally interviewed all of the Red Keep staff to ensure that they weren't loyal to Rhaenyra, but that purging did not include Cheese the Ratcatcher or any member of the City Watch. He says that he tried to talk to Alicent earlier, but she was indisposed, signaling that he knows that she must have been hooking up with Sir Criston and is now feeling jealous because, you know, they were supposed to share their foot fetish thing. So in the next scene, when Alicent sees his bathmaid crushing something into her soap, she shoos all the maids away out of paranoia because Alicent now doesn't know whether she can really trust anyone in her staff now that Larys handpicked everyone and that Larys might be jealous of her with Sir Criston. This is now the world they're living in. Constant paranoia that anyone in your staff could be trying to poison you. Rhaenyra finds fishermen south of Storm's End pulling in with their nets a severed wing of Arrax, Luke's dragon. There's a smooth visual effect with Rhaenyra dismounting Syrax. The camera stays on Syrax flying in and landing, and in the same shot, Emma Darcy, a practical shot of the actor I assume, is composited in over this visual effect of the dragon, sliding down the side of the wing and landing in the sand. Now, Emma probably was seated on like a chroma keyed mount structure, but they composited in their shadow on Syrax's wing on each of the folds of the wing, and I gotta say it's pretty solid. Rhaenyra finds with Arrax's wing Luke's red and black Targaryen flying cloak that she last saw him in when he left Dragonstone in the season 1 finale, and as she sobs, Syrax walks over and roars in agony as well. Meanwhile, Aegon enters the throne room to hear petitions, first from Gerard, who pleads that the crown has taken 10% of his sheep, which Aegon vows to return, before Otto reminds him that those sheep are to feed Sunfire and Vhagar. Aegon childishly seems to think that he can return one man's sheep without the other herders knowing, but Grandpa makes it super clear.
When the king speaks, your grace, all hear it.
And then Aegon drops his voice now like a big boy. But interesting, we see later with Blood and Cheese going through the same room, when the king says anything, there are plenty of people in the shadows who hear him. Next we meet this smith named Hugh, who mentions high iron costs and asks to be paid up front before building scorpions, and Aegon agrees.
Our victory depends on the efforts of the small folk.
The way he pops that K on small folk seems to be his way of kind of clicking at Grandpa to back off. And notice as Hugh turns, his hair is pulled back in a ponytail, and it is Valyrian platinum colored. Now, this character is Hugh Hammer. He's played by Kieran Bew, and he's going to be an important character to the events ahead, but more on him in the spoiler dungeon. Larys pulls King Aegon aside and says to be wary of his current hand, his grandfather, Otto.
I would think, as we find ourselves standing within a hair's breadth of war, that you would wish to be viewed differently.
Clever. Larys, sensing Alicent's distance, moves closer to the king instead. Himself as a possible new hand someday. I like how he pronounces think the same way he heard A pronouncing folk to shut up Otto.
I would think
our victory depends on the efforts of the small folk.
Alicent rages at her father for undermining her in front of her sons, and she brings up Aemond.
Aemond is angry. Rhaenyra's son took his eye and was never punished for it. What he did, however vicious.
The caprice of youth.
Whoa, okay, so Alicent is saying that Lucerys deserved to die a violent death because he was never punished for a boy fight that took out Aemond's eye, even though Aemond at the time was like, I lost an eye, but I gained a dragon. Yeah. Aemond totally came on top in that moment. Why is Alicent still so mad about this? Moments like this are why I'm convinced the show producers want us to side with Rhaenyra and paint Alicent as cold and uncaring about anyone other than her own kids. There's also this episode's changes to Blood and Cheese, but we'll get to those later. Velarion's ships intercept a white-sailed ship leaving Blackwater Bay, and Eric Cargill finds Mysaria. Mysaria would be one of the spies purged by Larys from King's Landing. Daemon, who once claimed Mysaria as the mother of his child in Dragonstone in that move against the crown, grills her now as a spy who played both sides of the family.
How long have you been selling secrets to Otto Hightower?
As long as he had gold to pay for them.
From the trailer, it sounded like this season would do away with Myzaria's odd attempted Mauritian accent, but the French sound does come back in some of the lines.
Do you think I would wither in your absence? You only blame me because your true enemies are out of reach.
Sir Eric tells Daemon that Mysaria was not an agent of the Hightowers, and that's not really fair for any of these Targaryens to be judging anyone else in their orbit who struggled to pick a side in the early days of this family dispute.
And we swore the same oath, to defend the whole of the royal family. So what were we to do when they turned against one another?
It just really shows the impossible standard of absolute loyalty during these times of civil war. Rhaenyra returns to Dragonstone and she passes a room that contains a massive dragon skull. It's similar to the skull of Balerion the Black Dread that's beneath the Red Keep. But since Vhagar is still alive, for any dragon to be this big, it must be, by the process of elimination, Meraxes, the dragon of Aegon the Conqueror's sister Rhaenys, the dragon who died when a scorpion pierced her eye in the First Dornish War. And there's this awesome long tracking shot of Emma Darcy going into the room, meeting with Daemon, and then rounding the table, standing at the head of it, ignoring the updates, and finally just uttering this.
I want Aemond Targaryen.
But what's fun about this shot is, at some point they would have had to change the camera from handheld to a crane or a wire so that it could glide over the candle-covered table. And I think they hid this handoff as the camera passed Matt Smith's black tunic. And you'll notice throughout this entire scene, Rhaenyra is clutching in her hand Luke's cloak. Around this table are Daemon's daughters that he had with Lyanna from Pentos, Baela and Rhaena. And then to the right, Sir Stefan Darklyn, the Lord Commander of the Queen's Guard. And then next to him, Lord Simon Staunton of Rook's Rest. And then Sir Alfred Broom, who is a loyal knight to the House Targaryen. And then on the other side of the table, to the left of Rhaenyra, that's Lord Bartimos Celtigar of Claw Isle. Bartimos Celtigar, I think, is my favorite name in this show. And then Grand Maester Gerardus, this is the maester that's assigned to Dragonstone. And then pulling back, Sir Laurent Marbrand of the Queen's Guard. Jace returns, led to Rhaenyra by his betrothed Baela, who sweetly touches his arm as she leaves. Which means when he was grieving his brother, he first went to Baela for strength and comfort, just to try to steel himself before he would have to report to his queen mother. He reports that Lady Jane Eyre has pledged her support in exchange for a dragon to guard the Vale. There was more in that deal with Lady Jane that we'll get to in the spoiler section. And he reports that Kragan Stark has promised 2,000 Greybeards, but just breaks down. And this unimpeachable grief that this episode lets Rhaenyra and Jace express, it's not anger, it's just sadness at this point. It's another example of how the show, as opposed to the book, really wants us to sympathize with the Blacks more than they want us to sympathize with the Greens. And we see intercutting scenes of this morning, like the Blacks all together holding Luke's funeral as Jace throws in one baby blanket on the fire. The youngest son Joffrey throws a toy that was probably hand-me-down from Luke. Rhaenyra throws in other clothes. Meanwhile, Alicent is the the only one of the greens in the sept. She lights candles for everyone else in her life who died first, including Allery Florent, who was Alicent's late mother, Otto's wife, who died shortly before the series began, and next a candle for Viserys Targaryen, and then lastly, after like long hesitation, a candle for Lucerys Velaryon, which she just says in like a hushed whisper. It's almost like she's like, do I have to do this? I don't know. Some of you may be watching it feeling like, oh, Alicent, I get where she's coming from. Not in my book. I think she's doing the bare minimum from a screenwriting perspective to give Alicent some semblance of humanity. But structurally in this episode, I appreciate how Alicent blowing out this match kind of brings us to nightfall for the rest of the episode, because it is dark from here on out. So we see Daemon sneaking back into King's Landing, bribing his way in, and he meets a City Watch Goldcloak. This man is known only as Blood. Daemon used to command the City Watch and held a unique loyalty over these men. Blood escorts Daemon as if he was a prisoner to Cheese, whom Daemon has been told has gambling debts from the fighting pits. But then Daemon hires him to do the following.
You're to find and slay the Prince Aemon Targaryen.
And then when Cheese asks what if they can't find Aemond, the scene cuts away. So this is a recurring move for the producers of House of the Dragon when it comes to the character of Daemon to often leave it a mystery what exactly he said, and instead have other characters quote his more controversial historical moves secondhand. But in the book, Fire and Blood, it's reported that Mysaria, at Daemon's request, directly hired Blood and Cheese, and that the order was to kill one of Aegon's sons, either Jaehaerys or Maelor. In the book, the target was an innocent child, but the show has Daemon order to kill Aemond, and we don't see what he says as a backup option, just that later Blood says a son for a son.
A son for a son, he said.
But whose son did Aemond say? Did they just confuse what exactly he said? What was the context of Aemond saying these words to them? We'll never really know. This is a significant change that we cannot ignore. It makes Daemon both more active, as he is giving this order himself, but also less treacherous, as he would be saying priority number one would be to kill an adult with blood on his hands for vengeance, instead of to kill an innocent who had nothing to do with it. But also it makes him equally mysterious, as the show just kind of leaves us guessing exactly what words he gave the assassins after they cut away from the scene. Meanwhile, Aemond and Sir Criston plot to invade the Crownlands, wanting to do so without having to go through Otto or Alicent, to force houses Rosby and Stokeworth, which Aemond sees as a way to take their levies and advance toward Harrenhal. And I like how they use gold and silver coins, because to use real battle map tokens would draw more suspicion, and here they just kind of look like coins tossed on a map, errantly. Aemond bemoans his mother Alicent blaming him by starting the war by killing Luke, despite her and Otto conspiring to take the throne.
Her Grace speaks with two tongues.
But Sir Criston defends Alicent here and blames Rhaenyra for corrupting Alicent into deceit, really just because he doesn't like the idea of the tongue he's tangling with could be tied with anyone else. He is so full of shit. Yes, Rhaenyra was a little deceitful. Alicent has been making all the conspiratorial moves. He's just spurned that Rhaenyra didn't want to run away with him. But I appreciate that in this scene, they show Aemond and Sir Criston drinking wine. For non-book readers who might now be worrying, well, if both of these men are drunk, might Blood and Cheese have a better chance at slaying Aemond? But either way, it's important that they're drunk, because both of these protectors are completely useless when invaders come into this wing of the Red Keep. Cheese leads Blood through the Red Keep sewer, going straight into the throne room, and he finds Aegon drunk on the Iron Throne with his buddies.
Would always be Aegon the Strong.
My nephew's already taken that.
Yes, Aegon is mocking Jaehaerys here, because remember, Aegon and Aemond would call Jace and Luke and Joff Strongs to imply that they're the bastard sons of Harwin Strong. Blood looks up to see the new statue being erected. We saw this in the background of the earlier petition scene. This is a statue of the late King Viserys. Season 1 showed his gradual transition from living person to lifeless object. And as Blood and Cheese leave the throne room, Aegon's bud suggests the name Aegon the Dragon, to which Aegon agrees, calling himself the untamable beast. And it's ironic considering his male heir will soon be killed, and it might be the end of the throne through his specific bloodline. Cheese tells Blood that the royal quarters are off limits, monitored by a different group of rat catchers, justifying why Larys wouldn't have noticed Cheese in his staff purge, and why Blood wouldn't know which room was Aemond's and which belonged to the other members of the family. But the first room they find is the right room. This is Aemond's chamber. This is the room that we saw earlier. Cheese raises his torch to see this painting. This painting depicts Harrenhal when it was burned by Balerion the Black Dread during Aegon's conquest. For Aemond to look up at this mural every night informs why he's so eager to take his dragon to Harrenhal and to get there first before Daemon gets there with Caraxes. Historically, Harrenhal is the foothold to power in the Riverlands. But Blood is spotted by a chambermaid. She runs off and Blood can't find her, but he does find Cheese with a knife to Helena's throat. in the nursery. So here we go. Cheese points to the 2 beds where Jaehaerys and Jaehaera are sleeping.
They both look the same. Which one's a boy?
Blood says that the woman knows, and Cheese says to make her choose. Helena points to one bed. Blood assumes that she wouldn't give up the heir that easily, but Cheese looks into her eyes and says,
No. She's telling true.
And then they go into the bed on the left, they cover Jaehaerys' mouth, and I will not show this clip because the sounds are just not anything I want to hear ever again. Helena grabs Jaehaera in a state of shock, and we follow her all the way to her mother's quarters, where Alicent is currently bedding Sir Criston.
They killed the boy.
The disassociation that Fia Saban plays this with is just so heartbreaking. She is a dreamer or a green seer, and she knew to fear the rats, so she is seeing her visions come true. So she's not entirely sure if this is present reality or a dream. She's reacting as someone trapped in a nightmare. And you'll notice that Helena had to take the same path down the steps with Jaehaera in her arms that Rhaenyra had to make with her newborn Joffrey in her arms back in episode 6 of season 1. From the nursery to Alicent's chamber. In that past episode, it felt like a tediously long walk for a woman who just delivered a child to have to walk, and pretty cruel for Alicent to have to make her do. Now it's a terrifyingly long scramble for Helena to have to make on the worst night of her life. But in the book, Fire and Blood, this whole incident goes down quite differently. There are 3 children, the twins Jaehaerys and Jaehaera, and then a younger boy Maelor. Blood and Cheese sneak into these quarters planning to kill either Jaehaerys or Maelor. They grab both Helena and Alicent, and they gag Alicent, making these 2 women watch as they grab both the boys, and they make Helena choose which boy to kill. Helena begs to take her instead, but Blood refuses, saying it has to be a son. Helena just panics and she chooses Maelor. Cheese whispers in the young Maelor's ear, "You hear that, little boy? Your mama wants you dead." And then Blood instead beheads Jaehaerys. So that's a lot worse, obviously, and I think if the show depicted a little boy being told that his mother named him to die, followed by everyone having to watch them behead the other son, who knows, that might have just been a bit too extreme for viewers, and instead the show found an opportunity to pose some deeper questions by the way they staged this. For one, this change removes Alicent from being an eyewitness, and it leaves Helena alone to witness it. And as a dreamer, which is something that is not in the book, it makes a dreamer's vision coming true before her eyes. Meanwhile, Alicent is guiltily engaging in sex that she said that she would never do again. And it also puts culpability on Sir Criston, because instead of patrolling these halls, he was inside the Queen's chamber the moment this happened. And by making this an extreme measure taken by Blood and Cheese, potentially going rogue beyond Daemon's orders, and by having Helena flee the room while it was happening instead of all of us lingering on it, you could say we end up with a bit less sympathy for Alicent and for the Greens than we would have if it was depicted exactly as it went down in the book. Like, you know, the camera didn't turn away from Vhagar eating Luke and Arrax. And by making this a choice between twins, it creates this dynamic of a mix-up between 2 identical children whose sex would be impossible to determine from their nightgowns. So you could say that it also might give all parties a bit of an out of a sincere mix-up, rather than a deliberate choice between one child or the other by name. Yet, Helena does point at Jaehaerys, the crowned prince, the heir, and Cheese, a gambling man, knows from her eyes that she's pointing with true intent. So she either hoped that they would second guess her, or she just panicked and chose to spare the girl, or maybe some part of her wanted this succession of male kings to end. But really, I just think she felt powerless because this is a destiny that she has foreseen, and she knows her choice didn't make a difference. Ultimately, by giving Aegon and Helena only one son in the show, it seems like they remove any possible male heir from the Greens at this point. This is the side that insisted on male primogeniture in order to give the throne to Aegon instead of to Rhaenyra, so that from here on, unless Aegon and Helena have Maelor, the succession is going to go from Aegon to his brother Aemond. So by taking a son for a son, they killed the boy. The fact that they killed the boy is an ultimate devastating blow to the Greens, and it's the latest strike in a civil war that will take more sons for more sons.
Yes.
Okay, let's close out with a spoiler dungeon where we theorize based on book-specific details that have not yet been revealed on the show. Okay.
By the way, guys, if you don't want to see this, skip to the end, or you know, just read my thing on Patreon. So
This chambermaid spotting Blood, I think, was to establish the fact that while Cheese will escape, Blood will be caught at the gates of the gods while attempting to bring Jaehaerys' severed head to Daemon. While Cheese will be able to blend in with the other servants, Blood now has this witness who can ID him. And I think Blood telling his interrogators he said a son for a son, that's gonna be heavily scrutinized what exactly Daemon's intent was with that. Another detail, Daemon at Harrenhal. So in the book, Daemon and Caraxes have already taken Harrenhal without bloodshed, before the dance at Storm's End even, leading to victories at Burning Mill and Stonehenge. Daemon is therefore at Harrenhal during all the events of Blood and Cheese and communicates with Mysaria via Raven. Now Daemon is more directly implicated with the Blood and Cheese event, and coming episodes may show his arrival with Caraxes at Harrenhal, making it a motive for Aemond and Sir Criston to move forward with their plan. Next, Sir Criston and Aemond's plotting is totally laying the groundwork for the coming Battle of Rook's Rest. I have not seen anything beyond episode 1 before shooting this breakdown, but based on trailer footage, I think that is the big battle that the critics are referring to in episode 4, which would mean all this focus on Rhaenys and her decision not to torch Aegon and the Greens in the Dragon Pit is designed to set up this big mid-season battle with Vhagar and Sunfire in a battle with Meleys over Rook's Rest, which is going to end badly for Rhaenys. I also think the detail of Aegon wanting to give the herder back a sheep but having to backtrack because Sunfire and Vhagar need to gorge, I think is going to set up Sunfire's fate later after Rook's Rest when the dragon is wounded and grounded and just has to eat sheep in the Crownlands. The characters of Alan of Hull and Adam of Hull as Velaryon bastards are dragon seed and will become dragon riders for the Blacks. When Daemon recruits bastards with Valyrian ancestry to try to tame wild dragons in the Dragonmont and to try to ride on behalf of the Blacks. There is a shot at the port when a burst of flame goes off beside Alan that seems to foreshadow his future with fire, because specifically his brother Adam ends up bonding and riding Sea Smoke, which is Laenor's old dragon. But since Laenor is still alive in the series, we don't know what that means for Adam, like if he'll bond with a different dragon or if Laenor is still going to be in the mix. But we do see Sea Smoke in trailer footage for this season. Alan, meanwhile, seeks the wild dragon of Grey Ghost but is unable to find him, and then tries to tame Sheepstealer, but gets very badly burned, yet considers himself lucky because Sheepstealer ate everyone else except for the future dragon rider of Nettles. But there is some speculation that the show might merge the character of Nettles with the character of Rhaena. I hope that's not the case. And speaking of Dragon Seed, in Fire and Blood, Hugh Hammer becomes a Dragon Seed, and we meet him this episode, and we get confirmation of his silver Valyrian hair. But Fire and Blood never speculates on who his father might be. He could be descended from any Targaryen king or prince in King's Landing for the past century. In the book,
I'd say Jaehaerys.
Starts in Dragonstone, though, so I'm curious why the show starts him as a smith for the Greens in King's Landing. Like maybe he'll betray the Greens, or maybe the Greens are going to try to make him a dragon seed for them to counter the Blacks' operation. I don't know how they would do that because only the Blacks for now have access to the wild dragons in the Dragonmont. So something's going to happen between now and then where he ends up leaving and going to Dragonstone, I assume. Now, Jace mentioned that Lady Jane Eyre wanted a dragon to protect the Vale. In Fire and Blood, Mushroom claims that Lady Jane wanted Jace to bring her to climax with his tongue in exchange for her loyalty to Rhaenyra. But either way, this leads to Rhaenyra sending Joffrey with his dragon Tyraxes to the Vale, and Joffrey brings with him Rhaena, Daemon's daughter, formerly betrothed to Luke. She's currently without a dragon, but Rhaena in Fire and Blood brings 3 dragon eggs to the Vale, praying nightly for their hatching, and we do see 3 eggs in the fire in the trailer. In the book, Rhaena ends up with the pink dragon named Morning.
Wow, just so much. I don't know. Let me know in the comments what you want me to do, Think Story or this. We're gonna see what the weeks bring us. So I'm gonna play it by ear right by now and just let things go by the wayside. So please smash that like button if you want to see more sexy and nerdy content, and subscribe if you think I deserve it. And remember, check out my Patreon. And I'll see you all in the next episode.